Hey everyone, welcome back to the Jacobin Show. I'm Jen Pan. I'm here with Paul Prescod. We've got a great show tonight. We are going to have Karen Nussbaum on. She is one of the founders of the organization 9 to 5. She'll be joining us around 6:30 p.m. Eastern. But before we get to all of that, we have an incredibly important announcement, which is that it's Paul's birthday. So if you're out there and you're watching, hit like to wish Paul a happy birthday. Paul, hi and happy birthday.
Hey, yeah, that really is the present I've always been wanting, is to get more likes and subscriptions. But yeah, I mean, I'm turning 30. We were just talking about this. I don't know whether to feel really happy or really sad about this. So this show is going to be a therapy session to help me process turning 30.
And we will get to therapy at some point in the show, so stay tuned. So actually, you have another birthday present, which is that Joe Biden came out this week and said that I wouldn't say endorses or supports the Amazon union, but he's been very adamant that Amazon should not interfere with workers trying to organize, which of course they shouldn't. And this has been sort of interpreted as an extremely pro-union statement that, is almost unheard of from a sitting president. So let's watch a short clip of Biden giving the thumbs up to the Amazon union.
Today and over the next few days and weeks, workers in Alabama and all across America are voting on whether to organize a union in their workplace. I've long said America wasn't built by Wall Street. It was built by the middle class, and unions built the middle class. Unions put power in the hands of workers. They level the playing field. They give you a stronger voice for your health, your safety, higher wages, protections from racial discrimination and sexual harassment. Unions lift up workers, both union and non-union, and especially black and brown workers. I've made it clear when I was running that my administration's policy would be to support unions organizing and the right to collectively bargain. I'm keeping that promise. You should all remember, the National Labor Relations Act didn't just say that unions are allowed to exist. It said that we should encourage unions. So let me be really clear. It's not up to me to decide whether anyone should join a union. But let me be even more clear. It's not up to an employer to decide that either. The choice to join a union is up to the workers. Full stop. Full stop.
So I guess I have an early question for LaborPaul, which is this a promising sign?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know there's been some criticism that, it's not a full-throated, clear statement of join the union, but I mean, someone should fact check me and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember the last time a president doing something like this and being that clear about, workers deciding to join a union, no employer interference. So that was pretty significant. And, I think I'm curious of where that came from. Was that Biden himself? Was that maybe the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, who comes from the labor movement? But it's kind of interesting in these early days of the administration. I feel like Biden he's definitely throwing some bones to labor. And I'm saying that not even to be dismissive. Like, there are significant things like firing the NLRB general counsel, who was terrible, and he replaced it with a pro-union person. The Federal Service Impasse Panel for federal workers, he fired all of them and replaced them. So I kind of wonder if he has this recognition that, unions are a core part of the Democratic Party coalition, and are part of still helping them to win, and he needs to do this. But it is kind of interesting to see this early on. I still don't have illusions that, he's going to be an FDR or an incredibly pro-union person, but it is kind of interesting what he's doing early on.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been sort of struck by the difference between Biden's approach to labor and Trump's approach to labor. So Biden, as you point out, kind of has these low-key sleeper labor hits just in the background, like the NLRB stuff. is important, but I don't think is necessarily like showy, or it's not something that everybody would immediately be like, this is a great pro-labor thing. It's kind of in the background, right? And Trump was sort of the opposite in that he talked a big game about protecting workers from bad trade deals. He dabbled in a lot of blue collar drag, like, you know, showing up to factories in hard hats and like sitting in big rig trucks. But of course, he was extremely anti-worker. His administration was extremely anti-worker, and his NLRB was terrible. And with Biden, you know, like I said, I think, especially for a lot of us on the left, there was sort of a disappointment with his lack of labor rhetoric at first. I mean, he kind of did the like Scranton Joe thing, but, you know, I think everybody wanted him to go harder on that.
Right.
He did say he would be the most pro-union president. But, you know, I think that a lot of people expressed misgivings when he was on the campaign trail that he wasn't really talking about labor enough, or he wasn't really talking about bread and butter issues enough. And I remember just last week, you know, people were saying, well, Biden hasn't come out in support of the Amazon union. When is he going to do that? Well, lo and behold, he has. So again, this isn't to say that like he is the most pro-union president we've ever had, or that he's the next FDR or anything like that. You know, there are some other parts of his administration that I think are troubling for labor. But that said, you know, we can't discount that. I think this is a step forward.
Right. Yeah. And I think it might be just a sign that, you know, he is, despite how right wing he's been his whole career, like he still came of age at a time, you know, in the 70s where union density was still huge. And, you know, a politician had to know how to talk to unions, had to be in that world. And, you know, even a local union leader in Philly that I work with and he's someone that is like us, you know, clearly understands what Biden is. But he said, like, yeah, I mean, I've been in meeting with him, and he's like a charming motherfucker. Like he knows how to talk to unions. You know, he knows how to say that, all of that. So it's just kind of just been interesting to watch how far this will go. And again, I mean, I kind of wonder, is this labor secretary, what kind of influence can Marty Walsh have on him? You know?
I do want to add just really quickly. So David Dayen in the American Prospect recently brought up the fact that Biden's White House appointed Seth Harris, who is an Obama administration alum, who was unfortunately one of the architects of a policy paper, which became the blueprint for Prop 22 in California. So basically legislation undermining the rights of gig workers and classifying them as independent contractors or not as full employees. So that's, I think, a troubling sign. Or, you know, that's something that I think tarnishes the record a little bit. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with that. But I did want to shout out the American Prospect for just putting that out there, putting a little bit of a damper on the good news. And then I also wanted to talk about the minimum wage fight in the Senate, because I think that's another area in which, you know, Biden could be fighting a little harder. So obviously what has happened in the Senate with the minimum wage increase, which was tied to the federal relief bill, is that the Senate parliamentarian, not a role that we hear often about, has recently sort of invoked this arcane regulation that the minimum wage increase cannot be part of the federal relief bill. And I just want to say, like, I had never even heard of a Senate parliamentarian before this week. And part of the reason for that is because in the past, when the person in this role has, you know, objected to some kind of piece of legislation or objected to some part of legislation that Republicans want to ram through, they just ignore the person or go around them, or like, I think in some cases fire them. So
yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I don't want to get into the like a hero worship thing, but it's so interesting watching this and then comparing it to like how Lyndon Johnson was a president. And again, I'm not like some Lyndon Johnson person. Obviously, he was a real son of a bitch if you know about him personally, and like obviously the Vietnam War. But, you know, if he wanted something done, he would fight for it and he would do whatever it would take to do it. So it's so pathetic. And again, maybe this is speaking to, unlike unions where there is this organized constituency that Democrats, if they're smart enough, realize they have to cater to a little bit. You know, the people that would benefit from a $15 minimum wage are not like an organized constituency in that same way. So maybe they feel that they don't really need to push for this. They don't need to fight for this. But I mean, it's just been pretty striking how, you know, easily they give up in every situation. And yeah, I mean, labor should be fighting for this more also. I mean, it'll be also interesting to see where the PRO Act goes, you know, because that's going to take 60 votes in the Senate. So, but of course, Biden has the excuse there, you know, so he can claim support for it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like how long can we keep going on with the minimum wage where it's at, and especially in a bill that's so modest where each year it just ticks up a little bit, and in 5 years we'll get $15 minimum wage. You just feel like something has got to give at some point.
I also just want to quickly point out, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is so incredibly popular. In fact, it's it's more popular than most Democrats, which I think we've talked about on this show before. You know, you saw in Florida, they passed a $15 minimum wage ballot initiative, but at the same time voted for Trump. And I think that kind of perfectly encapsulates the frustration that I think at least I feel when I see the Democrats not going as hard as I think they should for something like this. It's like this could be a huge winner for you.
And also,
politically,
I mean, yeah,
not just morally.
And it's one thing. It's like, if you weren't going to do this and fight for it, why make it such a clear promise? I mean, similar with the $2,000 checks, and it's like, all right, if they get $1,400, okay, fine. But it's like, you were very clear. I mean, he had that whole meeting with Bernie where he's like, I am for a $15 minimum wage. Like, why are you making these public statements about this if you're not gonna follow through?
I wonder if you have thoughts on whether there's anything that Bernie can or will do, because I admit, like, I don't really know that much about like Senate maneuvering, to be honest. But I do like that Bernie, like, every day kind of has a new scheme, it seems like, to get the $15 minimum wage across the finish line. And, you know, some of them have been sort of abandoned. Like, I think the whole like taxing corporations that don't comply with their own wage increase, I think that kind of went out the window. But now it looks like he's doing a kind of, dare I say, force the vote sort of tactic.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been hearing that too. And I don't want to go fully down the force the vote rabbit hole, but I mean, I think this is an interesting idea to consider. And where I see it different from Medicare for All, I mean, personally, my thought with force the vote is like, that would reveal what we all knew. I mean, the Democratic primary was basically Medicare for All versus everyone else. So like, revealing that they're not for it, to me, does not tell us anything we didn't know. But I think $15 minimum wage is different because like it was more a part of the party platform and out in public. So I do think it might be a little bit more interesting if they do force a vote on this, something that's been such like a public promise.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, let's dive into our segments now, because I think both of us have something a little different from what we usually talk about.
Yours is much more spicy than mine, so
so I'm going
get the popcorn ready.
And I just want to remind everybody really quickly that we're going to have Karen Nussbaum on at around 6:30 to talk about 9 to 5, the organization, 9 to 5, the movie, and organizing women workers today. So I guess what I want to dive into for my bit is I want to talk about an incident that took place at the private liberal arts school, Smith College. This is back in the news again because of a recent article in the New York Times by reporter Michael Powell. And I actually want to quickly mention that Michael is going to be on this channel speaking to Bhaskar Sunkara about this story tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. So definitely tune into that if you want to hear his perspective. So in the summer of 2018, a student at Smith College claimed that she had been racially targeted for, quote, eating while Black. Now, the student, who was on campus working as a TA over the summer, said that a white janitor had called the police on her while she was simply eating her lunch. As she wrote in a Facebook post after the incident, "All I did was be Black. It's outrageous that some people question my being at Smith College and my existence overall as a woman of color." So this incident really seemed to echo a number of other living while Black incidents that kind of unfolded across the country that year that have obviously taken place, you know, many times before. And as a result, it caused kind of this instant uproar on the Smith College campus. So Smith president Kathleen McCartney immediately issued a public apology to the student. She suspended the janitor involved, and she announced that the school would commit to a raft of new racial justice measures. Since the incident, Smith has overhauled its campus policing practices, appointed a vice president of equity and inclusion, set up special dorms reserved for Black students, and launched white accountability groups where faculty and staff are encouraged to educate themselves on anti-racism and, quote, unpack their white privilege. In addition to all of that, every staff member at Smith is now required to complete anti-racism training as a condition of their employment. So, was this a reasonable response to an instance of racism? Well, as the New York Times recently revealed, a third-party investigation into the 2018 incident found no evidence that any racial discrimination had actually taken place. According to the report, the student had been eating lunch in a dorm lounge that was closed for the summer. A nearsighted janitor in his 60s saw her, alerted campus security because that's what management had instructed all staffers to do if they saw anyone in a restricted area. The campus security officer who responded to the call recognized the student. They had a cordial exchange, and the officer apologized for bothering her. However, this wasn't the end. The student eventually posted the names, emails, and photos of 2 white staffers whom she believed had been involved in the incident and wrote, "These are the racists." As a result, those staffers, who actually had not been involved, received threats and harassment via calls, social media, and mailed letters. One eventually quit, and another, who was laid off during the pandemic, now says that she can't find new work because her reputation has been damaged by the accusations of racism. So, I think it's important to note here that these were workers who were making around $40,000 per year. So to put that into some more context, tuition plus room and board at Smith today costs over $78,000. And on top of that, the school has an endowment of nearly $2 billion. So in other words, to save face against a charge of racism, even one that was eventually dispelled, a wealthy private school and its administration cracked down on the one group that they had the most power over, which is, of course, their workers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to suspending one janitor and failing to protect at least 2 other workers from baseless public smears, the school now requires its staff, aka its hourly workers, to undergo anti-racism training. Now, according to the New York Times, it does not require the same training of its faculty, aka tenured professors who probably earn well into the 6 figures. Smith employees told the New York Times that the trainings were uncomfortable, psychologically invasive, and, quote, left workers cynical. Here's one former employee's account of what these mandatory sessions were like.
So I was troubled by the thought of me having to talk about my identity because I don't really come to work to engage in therapy or comb through past traumas or really to talk about religion or politics or anything. I really just come to work to do my job. I approached my supervisor and I said, I don't feel comfortable discussing my race at work, so I don't really want to do this. And she said, just say you're uncomfortable and abstain. I thought, okay, I kind of have her blessing here. So the first day of the retreat came, and there were 2 hired professional facilitators who presumably have authority in this area. They were from a local consultancy firm. We went around the room and the facilitators asked us to tell us about your race in the context of your childhood, your adolescence, and your college years. So now we have 2 things that I don't want to discuss with this group at work, which is my race, given the context and the backdrop of what's going on at that school, nor do I wish to discuss anything having to do with my childhood, adolescence, or college years in a workshop with my colleagues. I don't think it's relevant to my job. Everyone went around the room and pretty much recited the script. They personalized it and added concrete details from their life, but it was pretty much the script based upon their skin color. And it got to me and I said, I'm uncomfortable talking about this stuff at work, so I'm going to pass. So everything seemed like fine after that, but then a few hours later, one of the facilitators said, I want to be clear. Any white person who expresses discomfort or distress or any kind of resistance toward talking about their race when asked to is not actually experiencing discomfort. So don't feel like you should comfort them because it's not discomfort. It's called white fragility and it's a power play.
So in the past, both in articles that I've written and also on this channel, I've been critical of workplace anti-racism training for two reasons. One is that there's very little empirical evidence that these types of trainings reduce interpersonal racism at all. These trainings target so-called implicit bias, which is a murky concept that's notoriously difficult to quantify and tends to put people on the defensive. The other reason, which I think is even more relevant here, is that in the context of at-will employment, which is the norm in the US, of course, mandatory anti-racism training simply gives employers a pretext to surveil and intimidate workers while appearing tough on racism to the public. So I also want to add, when I've criticized anti-racism training in the past, I think some people have assumed that I'm only talking about like superficial corporate training, and that I'm actually calling for more radical anti-racism training. And I want to make it clear that I really don't support any kind of employer-mandated anti-racism training, no matter how radical it is, nor do I think that mandatory anti-racism training in the workplace should be part of any left or progressive agenda. So, your employer should not be forcing you to read Robin DiAngelo or Ibram Kendi, or even for that matter, Fred Hampton or the Combahee River Collective as a condition of your employment. I do not think your employer should be interrogating you about your racial or ethnic background or making you share your feelings and opinions on race in America. Most of all, your employer, the entity that literally controls your livelihood, should not be lecturing you about your supposed privilege. The vast majority of us need to earn a wage to survive, which means that we don't really have much of a choice about whether we're going to go to work or not. And in many cases, we don't have much of a say over who we even work for. So, when an employer demands access to workers' thoughts and political beliefs, and then makes this a requirement for continuing to collect a paycheck, is it really any surprise that workers are calling bullshit? So Adolph Reed and Walter Ben Michaels, you may have heard them say this before, they often say that anti-racism is not an alternative to class politics, it is a class politics. I think that the Smith debacle is a perfect example of what they mean. Again, this wealthy, prestigious institution and the people who run it are the ones who are propagating this program of so-called anti-racism that conveniently obscures the employment relation, collapses class distinctions, treats racial groups as homogenous, and worsens employees' working conditions under the guise of racial equity. Now, if you look at how the right-wing media has covered the Smith incident, it's clear that they think what's going on is proof of racism against whites, or proof of creeping Marxism, or proof that the left has just gone too far. However, what I think the incident actually reveals, and what the right and liberals alike constantly overlook, is the sweeping power that employers exert over their employees. So in the context of the workplace, even these supposedly progressive anti-racism initiatives that are administered from the top down and forced on employees will always put workers at a disadvantage. So here's a quote from Smith President Kathleen McCartney that I think shows how easily employers can absorb or commandeer the vague language of implicit bias to discipline workers. So right after the Smith employees were cleared of wrongdoing by the third-party investigation, McCartney justified her suspension of the janitor involved and her continuation of invasive anti-racism training by stating, quote, "It is impossible to rule out the potential role of implicit racial bias." So in other words, workers can't prove they don't have implicit racial bias even when they're exonerated by an independent investigation, and implicit racial bias is grounds for discipline. That's awfully convenient for the boss. Now, finally, for anyone who's wondering what actually does work to reduce racism in the workplace, we fortunately have one tool that's proven to be pretty effective at doing this, and that is unions. Now, of course, unions are in no way perfect. They're not 100% free from racism by any stretch of the imagination. However, we have approximately 150 years of evidence that shows that they're far more likely to reduce racist attitudes among white workers than, for example, the most expensive white fragility workshop on the market. It turns out that when workers are engaged in collective action alongside fellow shop members of different races, their prejudices start to break down. I want to read a quote by Megan Day, who wrote in Jacobin last year, "Unions give people the opportunity to routinely practice multiracial solidarity. Not only that, but they incentivize it. The more cooperative union members are, the greater unity they will have heading into a workplace struggle, and the greater the eventual reward for all. In that sense, diverse democratic unions can be schools of cross-racial cooperation, which are sorely lacking and desperately needed in our racially stratified society. But of course, for some mysterious reason, employers don't like this option.
That was great, Jen. And and I was just thinking, like, we really have to be careful here in terms of what is the left known for? Like, what is our reputation? Like, is this really what we want to become associated with? And we know that's what's going to happen. Even if it's not fair, that's how the right wing is going to spin it. And I look at this and, like, the workers going through that training and stuff, like, this is like a perfect recruitment tool to go to a Trump rally. I mean, we might as well just be like sending them to the right wing. This is like what they play on. And I would just suggest for people, for a really inspiring example of interracial unionism, it's a book called Religion of Unity about packing house workers in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it's incredible how you see, they started by just organizing around their shared interests, and that actually translated into like really actually breaking down people's, even their psychological racism and things like that. And, it's amazing the quotes from the workers. You'll see, you have a white worker who will say, none of us really like the black workers, but we understood, like, if we want a union, we got to unite. The black workers would say, yeah, we don't really like the white workers, they're not treating us well, but we understood that, like, unity was the only way. And through that unity, you fast forward like 5 years, and they're working together to desegregate bars and stuff in their area. And the white people actually are truly changed on a deeper level. So I would just recommend that book for people.
I also want to shout out the episode that you and Ariella did with Richard Hooker from the Teamsters a few episodes back, because he talks about something sort of similar happening in the UPS union that he's part of, where, when he joined the Teamsters leadership, there were some rumblings in the background from some of the white shop members who, said things like, oh, well, like, I don't really trust him, or like, I didn't vote for him, and just like flat out racist gossip.
It's going to spend all the money and
exactly. Yeah. But and again, he doesn't mince words. It was definitely a long and difficult struggle, but at the end of the day, he wins real demands for his shop, and like, now all of the same workers that were grumbling about him are like, yeah, he's the man. And so I think, it's not just that this happened in the 30s and 40s, although absolutely it did, but we can still see it happening even as the labor movement has declined since then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So on the subject of the 30s and 40s, you have an interesting segment that I'm going to let you dive into. It's of course about workers, but a group of workers that we don't talk about that often on the show. So take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're a year into the pandemic, and one of the things I miss most about the broader society is the arts. Going to concerts, going to shows, going to any kind of live performances was something we all took for granted before the lockdown. And just like the rest of the economy, the arts and culture industry has taken a devastating hit this past year. And the burden of this crisis has, of course, fallen on the performing artists themselves and all the people who do the work behind the scenes to make live art possible. The broader arts and culture sector, including Hollywood, is an $878 billion industry. This sector supports 5 million wage and salary jobs, including makeup artists, stage hands, ushers, camera operators, and the list goes on. Most performing artists are not millionaire movie stars or pop singers. The median annual salary for full-time musicians and singers was $43,000. It was around $41,000 for actors and $36,000 for dancers and choreographers. These people rely on a consistent stream of gigs to get by, and the disruption to their economic lives during the pandemic has been astounding. According to a recent New York Times article, during the quarter ending in September, when the overall unemployment rate averaged 8.5%, 52% of actors, 55% of dancers, and 27% of musicians were out of work, according to the National Endowment for the Arts. My fear is we're not just losing jobs, we're losing careers, said Adam Krothamer, president of Local 802 of the American Federation of Musicians in New York. He said 95% of the local 7,000 members are not working on a regular basis because of the mandated shutdown. It will create a great cultural depression, he said. And this is nothing short of a crisis for the arts. But we can turn to some of the more inspirational aspects of the New Deal for guidance on how we approach this moment. When people hear Works Progress Administration, they usually think of government-created jobs to build dams, create national parks, and overhaul our infrastructure. But the WPA also made other critical programs possible. Through the Federal Arts Project and the Federal Music Project, thousands of visual artists, sculptors, writers, actors, musicians, architects, and photographers were put to work with a living wage.
These reproductions of the American scene of today will make this one of the most fertile periods of our country's art. Some of this work is done on canvas, but much of it is created on the walls of our schools, libraries, and other public buildings in the form of mural paintings. Of particular interest is the great mural in the mess hall of the Military Academy at West Point, depicting great warriors of history. An art long dormant in the United States is the creation of stained glass windows. One project devoted to this art has made a window for the Military Academy at West Point, depicting scenes from the life of Washington. Commemorative tablets like this are among the contributions of sculptors to the Works program, and they also create works of art for our parks and public buildings. Many American museums have long been in need of highly skilled experts to restore valuable historical material, such as this Persian ceiling, which is forming under the deft fingers of a WPA artist in the Philadelphia Museum.
So art and the artists that produced it were treated as something to be proud of, to treasure, and to cultivate. During this brief period, art made its way out of the ivory towers, art galleries, and cocktail parties, and into public spaces to be enjoyed by as many working people as possible. The art historian Jody Patterson describes the artists of those years, saying they were given studio spaces, materials, a living wage, but also they had an audience, and that is really key. Art is part of a dialogue. You often have work sitting in a studio or in a gallery or hung above somebody's mantelpiece, but it doesn't have public reception. These artists had a built-in expectation that they have an audience. They were going to be put out into public spaces. That was really important. Also, there was a sense of community. Artists were often meeting together, not just in some of the spaces that had been set up in terms of studios and collecting paychecks, but at union meetings. There was a social scene. Artists were removed from the isolation and alienation of the ivory tower, intermingling and interacting and having discussions. The sculptures, murals, and paintings were done at post offices, schools, hospitals, parks, and museums, where the public lived and worked, telling the stories of working people. The Federal Art Project also had a non-discrimination clause that drew in a significant number of Black artists. 15% of all WPA employees were Black, and WPA propaganda even specifically highlighted this.
Under the Works program, musicians, artists, writers, and actors contribute their share to the cultural development of the community. The Negro Theater Unit of the Federal Theater Project produced a highly successful version of Shakespeare's immortal tragedy Macbeth, which far exceeded its scheduled run in New York and was later sent on a tour of the country. The scene was changed from Scotland to Haiti, but the spirit of Macbeth and every line in the play has remained intact. In this contribution to the American theater and in other projects under the Works program, we have set our feet on the road toward a brighter future.
Black writers like Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, and Zora Neale Hurston benefited from WPA art programs. Black painters like Jacob Lawrence and Alan Cricht were employed by the government to depict scenes from Black cultural life not usually aired in the mainstream. During its 4 years of federal financing, the Federal Writers Project supported almost 7,000 writers, editors, and researchers. The Federal Music Project employed thousands of musicians, gave public performances to the work of unknown composers, and trained music therapists. And these programs existed within a network of universal programs that allowed more people to take advantage of them. For example, Title II of the GI Bill funded schooling for veterans at the institution of their choice. And this security allowed many people to explore their artistic talents to develop their full human potential, instead of being forced to make the most pragmatic financial choice. If we could do this in the 1930s, there's no reason we can't recreate this spirit today. This should be our motto as we face the crisis of the arts in a post-pandemic world. not a patchwork of nonprofits and foundations. And this is about more than putting money in the pockets of artists, though that is important. This is about valuing arts for art's sake, for valuing the development of every individual's full human potential instead of measuring them by the profits they can produce. When we cultivate art as a public good and not a diversion for elites, we cultivate a culture of unity and solidarity. If you want an example of just what a society can achieve when it invests in its people and its artists, look no further than Venezuela. In 1975, the program El Sistema was dreamed up. Soon, with government backing, it became a universal program providing hours of music instruction built into the day of every child in Venezuela. Listen to the founder of El Sistema, Jose Abreu, talking about his vision.
No child is excluded. Children with special needs or who are blind or deaf all experience the transformative power of music.
Ese es el segundo gran patrimonio de nuestro
The set of values that is introduced into the children is that they live in a community that cooperates with solidarity, so that the orchestra becomes a school of social living. And the other value is that the community works and marches towards a common goal, a social goal and an individual goal.
Yo creo que la creatividad es un potencial de todo ser humano.
I think all music creativity is of value to all humankind, but classical music allows for a more elevated and rich set of values, more complex, more complete.
Más complejo, ¿verdad? Más completo.
Esto es el futuro que debemos tener en el mundo. Miles de niños, por lo menos, hablando musicalmente, miles de niños haciendo música, miles de niños disfrutando el hecho de poder tocar un instrumento, de poder cantar. Y eso es posible aquí en Venezuela. ¿Y por qué no en el mundo?
The deep social impact this program has had is undeniable, keeping youth occupied in a productive collective project and avoiding the most alienating features of their surroundings. Listen to what the participants themselves say about their experience.
Nosotros, a pesar que vivimos en un barrio humilde, que hay inseguridad, nosotros a pesar no han dado educación. Hay muchas personas que dicen, él vive en un barrio y no le han dado educación.
Era el primer día de la orquesta de cámara, entonces yo venía temprano y me dieron un disparo en la pierna y no pude ir. Entonces yo llorando porque no me dolía la pierna, pero más me dolía que no iba a estar aquí el día ese en la orquesta de cámara. Si se le olvida, cuando uno llega aquí se le olvida todo.
El profesor nos dice, toquen pero con su corazón. No con la mente, con el corazón.
En Venezuela, nosotros estamos en este momento trabajando para un universo de beneficiarios que se calcula en 265.000 jóvenes, pero esto es apenas el comienzo.
Nosotros estamos aprendiendo a tocar trompeta como para sacar nuestra familia adelante. Estamos para adelante como el elefante.
La raíz para mí del problema social está en la exclusión. Entonces nosotros tenemos que luchar por incluir el mayor número todos si es posible, incluirlos en este mundo bello, ¿verdad? Que es nuestro mundo de la música.
So what happens when you seriously invest in music as a social right? What happens when kids from some of the poorest and most violent slums of Venezuela get this opportunity? Just watch. Just amazing. Wish we could play the whole clip. Art is increasingly becoming the domain of the privileged and elite. We need to change that. And just like so many other social problems we face, this can only truly be done by public, universal programs with the full support of the federal government. Just like some people have a newfound appreciation for workers that deliver your food and your packages because of the pandemic, let us have a renewed appreciation for what artists do to make our society worth living in. And let's fight for federal programs that reflect that. And, Jen, El Sistema has become this global phenomenon. And there are a lot of attempts to do this in the United States now. But the problem is they are missing the fundamental point of it. They are trying to do it through nonprofits, these very limited patchwork efforts. And like what makes El Sistema is that it is a universal program. It has massive federal support or national support of the government. Interestingly enough, I mean, this started before Chavez. It's not even necessarily a byproduct of a leftist government there, but it's been supported throughout the years. So I think people who are trying to do that here on a limited nonprofit level are kind of missing the key ingredient.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the most important point that you make is that it's not just about supporting the artists themselves, although of course we want to do that, but it's about democratizing or at least broadening access to participation in the arts, which, as you pointed out just now, is sort of rapidly closing in the US. And it's just so cool. Like during the New Deal, like if you wanted to do some stained glass or like spend a year like going around the country, like writing poems about fields or whatever, that you could do that. And, it of course brings to mind the kind of classic or the famous Marx quote about, when we fairly distribute labor and resources, if you want, you can fish in the morning and like herd cattle in the afternoon and criticize after dinner. And you can do all of that without becoming a fisherman or, cattle driver or a critic. And I think for me, one of the kind of most painful things about, trying to make it as like an artist or a writer or any kind of creative in the US is that there's such intense professionalization because the path to success is so narrow. So it's like, if you want to be a sculptor, like you have to go to Yale Art School in order to have any kind of shot, or, you'll be working like a dead end job and trying to sculpt on your free time. And it's just, it's a mess. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, people want this. Talk to anyone right now, whether they're working class, middle class, leftist, not a leftist, non-political. You'll hear so many people say like, man, I miss concerts, like art is a thing, even if people don't think of themselves as like a highbrow artist, like art is something everyone loves and needs.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have gone a little over, and I think that Karen Nussbaum, who I really want to talk to, has been waiting patiently. So let's go ahead and bring her on now. Hello,
Hi.
Karen.
Hey.
So Karen Nussbaum is the founding director of Working America and the Working America Education Fund. She was a founder and director of 9 to 5, the National Association of Working Women. She was president of SEIU District 925. And she's also the former director of the U.S. Labor Department's Women's Bureau and co-author of the books Solutions for the New Workforce and 9 to 5. Karen, again, welcome to the Jacobin Show.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here. I love Jacobin. And I have to tell you, my dad, who is 97, is a working actor. And he's really unhappy because he hasn't been able to get a gig since the pandemic. But
that's amazing.
Thanks so much.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the subject of acting, I wanted to sort of start off by saying that I think lots of people are familiar with the comedy 9 to 5, which, of course, stars Jane Fonda, Dolly Parton, and Lily Tomlin. And I think a lot of people, think of the Dolly Parton song 9 to 5 as kind of this great working class anthem. And they love the movie because it's this like madcap adventure of women office workers who are rising up against a sexist and incompetent boss. But I think that not everybody knows that the movie was actually inspired by a real group of women clerical workers in the 1970s. This became a national organization, which of course is 9 to 5, and then later was a union, SEIU Local 925, which I love. And you, of course, were one of the co-founders of 9 to 5. So just to start off, can you talk a little bit about what you and other secretaries and clerical workers were sort of facing on the eve of starting 9 to 5, and what really pushed you to organize?
Well, I was a political activist. I had been very active in the anti-war movement, which is actually where I met Jane Fonda originally. And there was, it was a time of tremendous upheaval. There was a huge political organizing around the war. The women's movement was growing up. There was a huge there was a disaster with a disgraced president, Nixon. We forget about, we get so fixated on Trump, we forget what a monster Nixon was. And typically at the same time, and you had this growth of social movements as well. But as an individual person, I was an activist in the women's movement and the anti-war movement, and I had to work. I had to pay my bills like anybody else. And it didn't take me long to realize that I could also be organizing on the job. There were so few jobs available for women. I got what most women ended up doing, which was to be a clerical worker. And then we began to, while the women's movement really hadn't been speaking to working women for the most part, what we found is if we could make it our own, we could create a space in the women's movement for working women. And as we organized, we could transform the labor movement as well.
And can you kind of paint a picture for people, before 9 to 5 and the gains that you all made? What was life like for clerical women workers in terms of the treatment they had to put up with? What was considered normal back then for women workers?
Well, to start with, when you were looking for a job, you'd look at want ads and they had help wanted men and help wanted women. So it was really explicit right out there that there were just some jobs for women and you don't even bother to get the jobs for men. As a clerical worker, a lot of my coworkers felt good about the fact that we had to dress up to go to work. So that must mean that we were better than factory workers. But once we started looking at the statistics, we realized that we made much less than factory workers. Sexual harassment was a term that really hadn't even been coined yet, and it was endemic. At 9 to 5, soon after we started running contests, the pettiest office procedure, the bad boss award, those kinds of things. And the entries were astonishing. The boss who required his secretary to sew up his pants while he had them on, another boss who had gave his secretary a beeper, sent her out at 5 o'clock at the end of the workday to the local bar, and then to let him know if there were any women in the bar who had expectations. And we know that these stories were true because these men and their secretaries ended up going on television. Phil Donahue, other television shows would bring them on after we had given them the awards, and they weren't even embarrassed. It was just accepted. So you had low pay, no opportunity for advancement, casual sexual harassment. That's what work was like in those days.
And just to follow up on that, so something that you alluded to just now, and something that I remember from the 9 to 5 documentary, is that the women of 9 to 5, the secretaries and clerical workers, didn't really identify with the feminist movement, as you said, and also were not part of the labor movement, at least in the beginning. So they were kind of like at the intersection of the two, but also kind of outside of the two. And there was something in the documentary that really struck me, which was that one woman who was part of the organization said something like, well, like, we don't want to demonstrate because that looks too radical. And that kind of speaks to some of the other actions that you just mentioned. So could you talk a little bit about who the women of 9 to 5 were, and why they didn't identify with either the feminist movement or the labor movement at the time?
Well, our ambition was always to reach out as broadly as possible, that we always believed that you shouldn't make your words be the enemy of your ideas. And at the time you had a labor movement that had taken a step back, wasn't doing much organizing, was seen as the domain of men. They had hit a peak in membership and were mostly administering contracts around then. There had been a big wave of organizing spurred by the civil rights movement, largely in the public sector and in the healthcare industry. But outside of that, there wasn't much room. And the women's movement was seen as being, it had been named as women's libers, that it had an image that didn't seem appealing to most working women. So we just took those ideas about women's equality, women's empowerment, the right to have a say on the job, that women were legitimate workers no matter how we were treated, and broke that down into small enough bites that any woman could join. Any woman could find strength in herself from being part of something bigger. Any woman could grow from that experience and then begin to identify in a much bigger way. We had no backlash from women. We were able to talk about things in a way that just opened a door, didn't close any doors, and it was wildly successful.
And to follow up on this, talking about how you made the organization as broad and inclusive as possible. And this might be kind of a leading question, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this. I think this is a huge problem on the left today, if I'm being frank, that, instead of the mindset of being as broad and, reaching to people that don't already agree with us, it's like, let's add litmus tests upon litmus tests upon litmus tests. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you see that as like an issue that's out there now among the left?
Yeah, I do think it's a problem. And the work that I do with Working America now, America is we call it the community affiliate of the afl-cio. It's the community organization that goes out every night into working class communities, going door to door when there's a pandemic, talking with people, the people who aren't talking to us, we have to go out there and not prejudge what people are going to think, who they are, how they're going to respond. We need to be human beings. And if you do that, then you can have the chance of connecting with someone as another human being. We go into working class neighborhoods. We talk to people who don't have a union on a job because they already have a connection. And the people who are apolitical or who are Trump voters or swing voters, and have the conversations with them about what do you care about? There's strength in numbers, that if we join together, become a member tonight, and if we join together, then we can do something about the big corporations that have way too much control over our government and our economy. That's a message that 2/3 of the people we talk to every single night agree with and sign up and become a member.
Mm-hmm.
If you break it down and you don't have a prejudice about who you're talking to, you can make a connection that can turn into worker power.
So something that is, I think, kind of related to that is in the documentary 9 to 5, I think you or one of your colleagues point out that in the 1970s, clerical workers actually were a much larger part of the workforce than manufacturing workers or construction workers. And, this is also, as you mentioned, a time when women are entering the workforce in very large numbers. So in a way, this was a sector that was almost primed to be organized, or almost ready to be organized. And I guess I'm wondering if you see any analogous part of the workforce today.
Sure. And, in a way, but the conflict that we were experiencing was that here, most people thought the common worker was a man in a hard hat. But in fact, there were far more women behind a keyboard than there were men in hard hats. But just our sheer size didn't make us ready to organize, because we were invisible.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't exist in popular culture. We didn't exist as a recognized workforce. And you have to create a sense of identity and common cause with people, across race and class, who can share the same concerns. With so many women in just a handful of jobs, we were middle class and working class women, white, black, brown, all races. And we came together consciously. You had to be very thoughtful about building the organization and making it inclusive. And you can see that from this picture of women in Cleveland. And here are women, our members in Cincinnati, who worked for 4 years to bring a union to the clerical workers at their campus. These were largely conservative, apolitical women, and you can see how furious they are and how ready to fight. That's the potential that we have. If we do good organizing, if we're conscious about breaking down divides, and if we're serious about power.
I guess this might be a spoiler alert, but there's an interesting moment in the movie where, you all got organized, you confronted the boss, and then nothing happened. And then you realize, oh, we should maybe learn about organizing. So, and people took trainings from the Midwest Academy. Can you tell me, what did people learn from the Midwest Academy that they didn't have before?
The Midwest Academy had just started, and they were teaching basic community organizing techniques. And what we did was we took, bring people together and have the next thing that you're going to do ready to go, and have a target, and know what you're going to demand and what you're going to do when they don't agree to the demands, and basic strategy stuff and basic ways to keep people engaged. What we did is we took community organizing tactics and we brought it into downtown. We organized in workplaces, and our community, though, was downtown in cities around the country. So we were able to open up a space for organizing, a discussion around jobs, a discussion about rights and respect for women workers, which then created a brand new opportunity to talk about unions. And I think if we hadn't had that space that we created, then we wouldn't have been able to move to the next step. And I think that we're seeing that today. Fight for 15 is a great example of engaging the discussion, creating an identity among workers who otherwise had not had a common identity, and a strategy to unionize at the same time.
So before we dive into 9 to 5 affiliating with SEIU, I do want to pause on 9 to 5 the movie, which came sort of in between 9 to 5 the organization and 9 to 5 the union. So you had mentioned you knew Jane Fonda from Vietnam War, anti-war activism. Can you talk a little bit about how the movie came to fruition, and specifically why was it important to make this movie a comedy and not a documentary, which of course comes later, but also not like a serious drama?
Yeah, I was friends with Jane. We'd been at meetings over the years. And then when the war finally ended in 1975, Jane decided to go back into her career as an actress. Here you see her at our annual summer school that we had at Bryn Mawr College every year with our Raises Not Roses t-shirt. Jane, I would tell her about the organizing that we were doing and what was happening in these workplaces and the bubbling up of, response from women all around the country. And it was her idea to make a movie. She said, I want to make a contribution in the best way I know how, and that's to make a major motion picture. So it was her idea, but then I had to write a memo, a pitch memo to the studio about why there would be an audience, because women office workers had been completely invisible in popular culture. There'd been nothing with the exception of Susie the Secretary on television in the 1950s. So Jane thinks about making the movie. She puts together the cast, and she spent one long night with about 40 of our members in Cleveland, asking them about their jobs. And towards the end of the discussion, she says, let me just ask, has anybody ever dreamed about killing their boss? And the organizers in the room were all horrified, oh, so outlandish. How can, so Hollywood, how can she ask that? But the room lit up because every single woman had a story about her fantasy about killing her boss. And all of that comes into the movie. And that's what made the difference for Jane. She originally thought it was going to be a drama, and then she realized it had to be a farce. So the movie ends up being, more modern times than Norma Ray. And I think that's what makes it so wildly effective. I think it's the best example of popular culture catapulting a social movement, that it comes right on the, it builds on a growing social movement, and then moves the discussion away from the debate about, is there discrimination in the workplace? Because millions of people go into a movie theater, and when they come out, of course there's discrimination in the workplace. It's outrageous. And now the discussion becomes, what are we going to do about it? It was a thrilling moment. And we had actually started our union as a local union in Boston in 1975, but right around the time that the movie came out, we became a national union. And we just embraced, we decided to call everything 9 to 5. 9 to 5, the association, it's got the character and concerns of the working women's movement. It's got the power of a union, our union 9 to 5, and it's got the glamour of Hollywood. We thought, I hope everybody gets confused about it, because that's the power in it.
Turns out the U.S. working class is extremely militant. Everyone wants to kill their boss, apparently. Who would have known?
Yeah, if you only just connect that to grievances,
Right. Yeah, not as sexy.
There's a few steps in between, right?
Right.
I do love it that in the movie 9 to 5, the fantasies that the workers have about kidnapping and offing the boss were actually drawn from things that women workers had told Jane Fonda. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, I don't think it would have been as successful. If Hollywood writers had made it up, it wouldn't have landed. But because it grew right out of the experience of women, it's like evergreen. I mean, I can't tell you the young people I know who tell me that their grandmothers made them watch 9 to 5 with them.
And I think
or the song, which is evergreen as well. It's kind of amazing. But the tragedy is that this movement that had this fantastic momentum just crashed on a sharp right turn, both in politics and corporate policy in the States in the 80s. We announced the beginning of our national union, District 925, the week that President Reagan fired all of the union members from the air traffic controllers. So it's the perfect example of these two trends that were happening at the same time: this momentum among workers and this crackdown on the part of both a corporate elite that had decided they were no longer going to compete on the high road. They were going to compete on the low road in the face of global competition. And they take out unions over the next 15 years. And the birth of a consolidated new right wing. The same year that we started 9 to 5, Phyllis Schlafly started Stop ERA. We didn't come in conflict with it, but that whole movement just gained tremendous steam, and we weren't prepared for it.
Yeah. And to go back a little bit, so I'll combine two questions in one. So, 9 to 5 is first this organization, not quite a union. So first question is, what did 9 to 5 win concretely for clerical workers? And then what prompted the decision to become a union?
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
What prompted the decision to become a union?
Oh, yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, we knew about unions. We knew there was power in unions, and it was a strategy. It was an approach that said, let's open the door as wide as we can, bring people in, give them transformative experiences, and then cement that in permanent institutions that can really wield power. So it was always a way to approach building both movement and organization. We really made a big difference. What can I tell you? Things that if you watch the 9 to 5 documentary now, younger people are appalled at what the working conditions were like. The casual sexual harassment is illegal and not acceptable. It may go on, but at least it's not acceptable. But it was completely ordinary in those days. The fact that women got paid less than men because the men were men and supported families, presumably, well, that was something your boss would tell you, and that wasn't illegal. We were able to change women's role in the workplace, and I'll tell you the momentum that we built, both through our public action, through our lawsuits, through our unionization, put so much pressure on employers that they, by the 80s, decided, okay, we'll create a safety valve here. We'll let higher level women, college educated, middle class, mostly white women into the game, let them be professionals and managers, where those jobs had been totally unavailable to women until the 80s. And so they split the workforce. They met the demands of higher level women, and they made life and work worse for working class women. And we've been living with that strategy for the last 2 generations. We have to celebrate the real changes that we made. We have to celebrate the ways unions have changed, because there were powerful women coming in with our own agenda and our own power into unions. Those are important changes, but we have to make sure that we are better prepared going into this next decade of massive opportunity, that we build the powerful permanent organizations that we need.
Yeah, so that reminds me of something that I wanted to ask you, which you kind of got at just now. when I was watching, the 9 to 5 documentary, I was struck that one of the demands of the secretaries and the women workers was they wanted more opportunities for advancement and promotion. And that absolutely made sense in that context where, as you say, there was a huge pay disparity. Women were being passed over for advancement and promotion. And that's actually a theme in the movie 9 to 5 as well. And something that you just brought up now, which I have been thinking a lot about, is I think that this demand for opportunities for advancement, especially among, as you were saying, like professional class women now, that's almost in many cases supplanted the demand for collective action. And I think the most famous example is like Sheryl Sandberg Lean In, or like on an even more abstract level, like when Hillary Clinton was running for president in 2016, you heard a lot of rhetoric like, well, this will be great for all working women because she's breaking the glass ceiling. And of course, at Jacobin, we always say like, well, we're interested in raising the floor for the many rather than breaking the ceiling for the few. But I'm wondering, as somebody who has kind of, who has obviously been in a movement that took that demand very seriously when it was a huge issue for women in the workplace. Like, how do we reconcile that tension?
I'll tell you, Jen, I never thought that was a very important demand. And to me, it was always a symbol of how constrained the imagination of so many women was at the time. We did early in the beginning of 9 to 5, the association, we created the 9 to 5 Bill of Rights. And so we got, 50 or 100 members together, and they debated what should go into the Bill of Rights. And it includes things like job posting, but it doesn't include, childcare or, higher pay or, and it represented what women at the time felt that they could ask for. Their imaginations weren't big enough. Now, it was also, as you say, a huge problem at the time. But how do you make solutions be about the collective good, not about allowing individuals to then find their way, and then you're left with nothing?
Could you go a little bit into like the organizing mechanics of how you made the organization racially diverse and reach truly, all the workers that there were to be reached?
Yeah, it's not that complicated. It's just hard. You have to be really thoughtful about it. So we never had a meeting or an event or people who spoke to the press. There was nothing that we ever did that didn't always have, it was always racially integrated. It always had older women and younger women. It always had working class women and middle class women. And it was what we taught all of our organizers to do. It's how we built our organizing teams. And that was their job going into the organizing as well. That you have to live what you preach, and then you have to give people experiences that help them overcome the limits of their own lives. So when you team co-chairs who are of different races, or two people who have to bring the snacks to the next meeting, and they are from different industries and are, the one's college educated and one has a high school education. You bring people together who otherwise don't have that opportunity, and then they make that connection and they make common cause, and it builds. You just have to think about it. It's just good organizing, and it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, Jen, that you don't have litmus tests, that you don't tell people what they can say and what they can't say, that you have to let people be humans and learn from their experience. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't have problems, especially on the union side, with the association. When you're doing organizing citywide, you've got limitless numbers of people you can try to attract. In an organizing campaign, you've got, a limited workforce, and we had to insist that white workers respect Black organizers, and it just had to be clear that that's what we were about.
So something that I also wanted to ask is, as somebody who's been kind of part of the labor movement or part of a union proper, and then of course outside of that, I think these days, you had mentioned the Fight for 15 earlier. We have other sort of pro-worker organizations that are not unions proper. Not just the Fight for 15, but we also have things like the National Domestic Workers Alliance or like the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. Sometimes these are organizations that, are made up of people who don't have collective bargaining rights because they're classified as independent contractors, or they're workers centers, or just kind of, there's a network of pro-labor or like pro-worker organizations that aren't unions proper, as I say. I think people used to call this alt-labor. I don't know if people are still using that term, but I'm wondering what you see as the potential. Do you see there being a potential for this kind of network to grow or to be integrated into the labor movement?
Yes and no. I think it depends on what people do and the alliances that they make. One trajectory for what used to be called alt-labor organizations is integrating people into the workforce. That doesn't necessarily mean integrating them into the workforce in the context of greater worker power. There's an important job to be done about raising standards, and these organizations do fantastic work in raising standards. But that's not the same as power. You need power to raise standards, but it doesn't necessarily give you power. It doesn't give you that ongoing power. And so I think that the strategy of having an outward-facing, non-collective bargaining organization that works with collective bargaining organizations is a good one. And certainly that's what the intent is for Fight for 15 and with many of these worker center organizations as well. But I think if the left doesn't appreciate the special, unique value of unions and do everything that we can to make sure that the trade union movement survives and thrives in this next period, then we will, we'll lose it all. There's no substitute for democratic, self-sustaining organizations of working people. Getting a grant from Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, awesome if you can do it, but they're not going to fund Amazon workers to organize. They're not going to fund any workers to organize. We need to pay for our own organizations. We need to vote on what we care about. We need to exercise democracy in our daily lives. I talked to a local labor leader who said, we need more organizations where people, take minutes, where there's a daily life of the organization, where you practice democracy. We need that for our democracy in our country too. So I think that there is an extremely important role for organizations that aren't collective bargaining organizations to reach big numbers of workers, but there is no substitute for unions.
Very well said. So when you look out today, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing women in the workplace today? Or is it all the same?
Well, one of the shocking things about the documentary is that the agenda is not that much different. Some things are now taboo, but what does that get us? Our pay is less, our jobs are more insecure. We don't have, pensions. Who ever heard of a pension? Those things used to exist. When I started working in 1970, I made minimum wage, but I had 5 days sick leave and 5 days vacation. And that's our very first National Secretary's Day protest in 1974. Work has got, as we all know, is worse now than it was 50 years ago. There's no future for most workers. The gig economy is a horror show. So we've got all the problems that we had then of, lack of power, lack of respect, lack of control, and magnified because because now you aren't even a worker in the gig economy, but you're just a battered cog. So I think that the organizing principles are the same as they were in the 50s. The marriage of movements with institutions is the same, but that we have to be crystal clear about just how powerful the opposition is. They are in disarray, and we better take advantage of that and build institutions while we can.
All right, so I think our last question, unfortunately, do you want to say anything more about Working America, what the organization is, what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. No, I loved 9 to 5 all those years, and I love Working America. Working America is this really unique organization. We've got 3.5 million members, and they're the people who are not in anybody else's organization, at least on the left. We know that because we actually matched our membership list with that of the big catalyst list that capture everybody else's organization. There's like 10% overlap. White working class, Black working class, Latino working class, that's who our members are. They are largely apolitical. They're the people who aren't on the hard right or the hard left. They're not watching cable TV. And for that reason, they are open to discussion. We find that a conversation at the door with a stranger is amazingly powerful. And we marry that with the very best analytics out there. We believe that everything that you do has to count because we're spending very often workers' dues. We're part of the labor movement. And we want to make sure that every penny that we spend that comes from a worker's dues is one that helps build a powerful movement of workers. We had a tremendous effect in the last election on moving Trump voters to vote for Biden. We've got all different ways to demonstrate that. And now we really want to, these next 4 years are so crucial. We need to reach those apolitical people who are so vulnerable to the right wing, and make sure that, that we deprive the right of their recruits to fascism, really, and bring them over to our side. It can be done. We do it every single day. It's a really glorious mission, and it's one that I invite everybody to join me in.
Awesome. I think that's all the time we have, Jen, unless you have any last questions.
I think that's a great note to end on. And thank you so much for coming on the show. This was very great talking about 9 to 5, the organization, 9 to 5, the SEIU local, and of course, 9 to 5, the movie.
Well, Jen and Paul, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Karen.
So
Great.
Bye. I highly recommend anyone watch the documentary. I think it's free on PBS. That's where I saw it.
I think it is too. Yeah, Paul and I were just before the show. We were saying we both had a chance to watch the documentary over the weekend. So I think it's streaming on PBS. It's amazing. I confessed to Paul near the end, I teared up a little bit. The documentary's that good. So definitely watch it. Yeah, and it's kind of fun. I mean, when I thought about having Karen on, I honestly didn't know much about her personally or her politics, and it's amazing. I mean, I think we're very much aligned. So that was great having her on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. On a related note, yes. We have LaborPaul questions. Just to remind everybody who's watching. So Paul takes questions every show that he's on that have to do with labor. So that can range anywhere from how do I organize my office all the way to what do you think of labor after Taft-Hartley, which is a question that we have gotten before. So let us bring up the first question. Oh, this is one tailor-made for Paul. So how does one go about making a teachers union local more democratic, militant, and strategic in fighting austerity and privatization? Paul, this is right up your alley.
Yeah, and actually the person that submitted this is a former member of my union, PFT. So this is a great question. I think, what they've done in the Chicago Teachers Union and the United Teachers of Los Angeles should kind of be a North Star for us. And both situations involve challenging the leadership in elections and winning and, going from that position to deploy the resources of the union. But I don't want to say across the board that the immediate answer is always to start a caucus and challenge the leadership. I mean, I think it's a case-by-case basis. People should try to work with their union leadership where possible. But sometimes, and as it's been proven in these cases, it does come down to an electoral challenge. And in the CTU and UTLA, when they started caucuses, they were not purely for the purpose of running an election. So they were vehicles for organizing the members around the issues affecting them and showing that a model of how the union could be run differently and be more successful in fighting austerity and other issues they were facing. So it's only through doing that organizing work that a caucus could have enough credibility to win a union election. And, part of the way to do this is building community alliances with parents and students. That's something in Chicago and LA they did, perfectly. So you can get with a group of people. And I think the key is to always be organizing around the most important issues and show by example that there's another model that can get us more victories. And I think some leftists make the mistake of, if they're starting a union caucus, seeing their role as like raising the most exotic left-wing political demands. And I think it's really more about finding the issues that are most broadly and deeply felt by the members and having a credible plan to win on those and demonstrating that you can win. And I think lastly on this, I'll say you need to tie the issues that seem abstract to a concrete program. I think vague talk of democracy may not really move many union members, but if you stress it in the context of, we need to discuss these contract proposals, we need to get member input on contract proposals, or we need to really discuss strategy in a moment of action, I think that can get people moving more when it's not an abstraction about democracy or equality, tie it to a concrete issue. So that, there's no way to fully adequately answer that in a quick amount of time, but that's what I have for now.
So I have a quick follow-up question, which is in your time as a member of PFT, have you noticed any changes? Like, has it changed much since you started?
Yeah, and there is a caucus inside the union that I've been active with, and we have run for leadership a few times. So yeah, I think people there's just more members who are more involved and have certain skills that they wouldn't necessarily have, without people trying to be there to develop those skills. Mm-hmm. I think even the current union leadership has kind of gotten in its head more that they need to communicate more and be more transparent. And I think they have slowly raised members' expectations as a result of this, kind of pressure. And we should realize it is actually very healthy for unions to have different slates, different caucuses. The United Auto Workers used to be famous for their conventions having 3 different caucuses debating all kinds of questions. And that's just very healthy internal culture. It's not even always about even if you're challenging a union leader, I would never put even a union leader that's not great on the same level as our class enemy. You know what I mean? Right. So it doesn't always have to be necessarily nasty. I think that's just building a vibrant culture in the union. Just like if you had a vibrant political culture means you have more than one political party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next LaborPaul question. So this is about the City University of New York. The CUNY union includes profs, grad students, food workers, sanitation workers, etc. Is this a good model given these different workers' divergent interests?
So this is what we call wall-to-wall organizing, when you organize every worker in that particular place, whatever the occupation. So, and I think it is a good model because while there are different jobs with different skills and issues, I wouldn't necessarily say that their issues are divergent. And I think this model demonstrates that we actually have the same issues of better pay, benefits, and working conditions. I think it does present challenges to how to get these different occupations and people on the same page, but I think it projects a message of maximum solidarity of working people. And, you know, sometimes you have issues where in one shop there are multiple different unions. Sometimes they can be played off each other and fragmented. I think this model avoids that. So, you know, I haven't really seen many issues with this kind of model.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it either, but just from an intuitive perspective, it seems like, well, it would be much worse to divide up the workplace. Yes.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of this is also case by case. But yeah, overall, I don't see an inherent problem. Many nurses unions are doing this also. You know, I mean, there's like health technology technicians and nurses. So like trying to organize them all into the same union.
I suppose maybe a fear would be that the like higher paid or like, you know, higher prestige elements of the union would somehow dominate the demands that the union is putting forward. Have you ever seen that play out, or is that kind of an unfounded fear?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just that I think maybe one fear about kind of lumping all different types of workers into the same union is that the higher paid workers or like the more elite workers their concerns would dominate the union somehow, just by, you know, virtue of the power differential. But I'm wondering if you think that's unfounded or if you've seen that play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I mean, I'll even say in my union, you know, we include like so teachers, but also school secretaries, school nurses, paraprofessionals. And I think, I mean, one thing we have been working on is making paraprofessionals more an integral part of the union. So they are severely like underpaid and their contract looks like way different than ours. So I don't think it's like a totally unfounded danger of that happening. You can also make the counter argument that, you know, if paraprofessionals were in a separate, smaller union, they would still have less power. And I think it still would be ideal to have a sector like that have a voice in a bigger union instead of like having a separate union that might be smaller and less powerful. I don't think it's inherent that in our union paraprofessionals have to not be respected. I think that's something we can actually change.
Yeah. All right, so I think we have one more LaborPaul question, and this one. So this writer says, "I'm a grad student wondering how to best organize my union, as most students are nominally left-leaning, but don't see themselves as workers, but rather in a transitionary stage." And I think that this is going to be something that comes up with, you know, every grad student union, or, you know, I don't know if you remember this, but a while ago, interns tried to unionize, or they did unionize. This was back in like 2013 or like 2014 or something. And the problem, of course, is that this is a group that's so transitory. Like by nature, these people will not be in this job in 1 to 5 years, right?
Yeah, it's tough. And, you know, so I've never done grad student organizing. And just so people know in general, I try to talk to other people for these questions to get, you know, feedback. And so I talked to a friend of mine that was recently involved in trying to organize grad students. And they said, I mean, one argument most likely to be effective is pointing out how tied grad students are to the whims of their advisors. And it really highlights like how precarious their position is and that they are not, you know, they are indeed a worker. And it kind of sets up this power relationship that is easily exploited. And I think, you know, if you tap into the real grievances, like I'm sure everyone is going to have some experience that highlights that. And also, you know, many grad school programs, like it might be transitory, but it's still, people are there for a very long time doing research or whatever. So I think stressing that, and just, yeah, especially if you're talking about adjuncts, I mean, increasingly, unfortunately, like people are not going to be becoming tenured professors anytime soon. They're relying on adjunct labor more and more. And I think people know that. So you can stress that, like, you know, chances are you're going to be stuck here for a while. And so you should have a union. So that's the best I can do on that one. I think if all else fails, there's always work at the post office. Say that.
Yeah, another one of your favorite topics.
Right.
Do you think there's been an increase in grad student unionizing over the last, say, 10 years? I mean, I feel like I've heard a lot about it over like the last, 5 to 10 years. And I can't tell if that's just because, the people who work in media like know grad students, so they're like, we want to focus on this, or whether there really has been, as a result of, now 2 recessions, and again, the ongoing adjunctification of the academy, whether there has been a rise in grad student organizing. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I don't have empirical evidence. I do think there has been a rise. And, also, I mean, part of why Trump's NLRB sucked and it mattered is that, they did offer a lot of bad rulings when it came to grad student organizing. So there was a lot of elections being held, but they were basically thwarted by the NLRB. I'll be interested to see if that changes under Biden, but it does seem like there is an uptick in grad student union organizing. So, which is, is a good thing. It's not like necessarily the most strategic sector in the world, but, still everyone should have a union. And I think especially for adjuncts, which of course is just becoming the wave of the future, like it is really important for them to be organizing and also just having a say in how the university runs.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, if the letter writer is out there and you or anybody else have follow-up questions for Paul about how to best organize, what you should do next, or just any question on labor history or anything about unions, definitely submit the questions either in the comments or in the chats. Use the hashtag LaborPaul if you hit up Paul on social media. And I think actually we are going to wrap it up for tonight. All of us are sort of having internet troubles here, and Paul has vanished. Oh no, he's back. He's back. Right in time. Right in time to say goodnight. So again, and again, if you were not here at the beginning, it is Paul's birthday. So please hit like to wish Paul a happy birthday.
Thank you. Wish me luck in my 30s, I'm going to start stretching more, I guess. I won't be eating more healthy, but
drinking more water, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. Something like that.
Again, happy birthday, Paul. This was a great show. Again, Biden's present to you was his pseudo endorsement of the Amazon union. Hopefully that goes well in the next couple of weeks. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.